There's a reminder that of late there have been several questions that have been put forward. And the first one is, what is it that has been constant and unchanging in our life? And secondly, where are we? We're in the place where nothing is the same, but everything is the same. So there's another story that is also both a poser and a teaser. So let's see what it brings up for us now. It's the story about that rich merchant who, with his wife, had longed for a child for some long while, until finally they welcomed a daughter, who they called Roseanne, which in that language means bright. And they doted on Roseanne, and she grew into not only a very bright being, but also a very beautiful being. Now in that time and place, at the age of 14, a girl was said to be mature enough to be married. So her parents set out to find her a suitable husband. And they did so in the form of another rich young merchant. And the wedding arrangements were made and took place. And as was the custom, Roseanne went back to her husband's house, where it was that the parents trained her to the ways of their household and to be a good wife. But as it happened, her mother-in-law was a widow, but she was also very kind to Roseanne. And very soon Roseanne had learned the ways of the household. And so her mother-in-law said to her at a time that she was going to go off and visit her sister in a far distant place, because now Roseanne was able to run the household very ably. Now this was at a time when her husband, the merchant, was called away on a trading mission. So Roseanne was at home by herself. Well, she was upstairs attending to some household duties when she heard a scraping sound downstairs, and she wondered what it was. So she crept downstairs just at the moment when a robber had opened the door and was creeping in. He was rather a disreputable-looking creature, and he was wearing felt over his shoes to muffle the sound, and he was carrying a bag, which was obviously to carry off his loot. But Roseanne, being the bright being that she was, thinking quickly, she went up to the robber and she says, "Oh, Uncle, I'm so glad to welcome you. We haven't seen you for such a long time, and we missed you at our wedding. But please come in, let me take care of you." And so she ushered the thief into her lounge room and sat him down and said, wait, I'll bring you a sweet sherbet and let me clean your... And so she kept up the banter with him for some time, and of course the thief was quite flabbergasted by this. He didn't quite know how to handle it all until he suddenly thought, well, he'll go along with it. And so he did. So he let Roseanne bring sherbet to him and cloth to wipe his feet and his hands, and then she kept up the banter all the time, and she said, wait, I'm going to cook you something fine because you're obviously famished, you come from far away. So during all this time the thief relaxed somewhat, and after eating and being given the hubble bubble pipe to have a little suck on, he went off to sleep. And so this gave Roseanne the opportunity to run over to her neighbor's house and bring back the neighbors, who gave the thief a very thorough beating and threw him out the door. Well, of course, when the thief got out the door, he was as angry as you could have this moppet, this little bit of a girl, treat him like this. So he vowed revenge. He would get even with her, no matter what it took. So it was some time later, when again husband was away on a journey, and the mother-in-law was back, but there was a knock on the door in the afternoon, and when the mother-in-law opened the door, there was a man standing out the door with 3 chests. And he said, I'm a friend of your husband's, and my friend, the merchant, has asked me to deliver these chests to you because your husband said you'd take care of them while he was away on a business dealing trip. So Roseanne, who was standing in the background, was a little bit suspicious of this, but she couldn't do anything because her mother-in-law said, yes, bring the chests in. And so the mother-in-law directed them to be taken into an upstairs room and put aside in a safe place with other goods in the storeroom. And it was all quiet, but Roseanne was very suspicious. So she went up to the chests and she found that 2 of them were locked and 1 of them was unlocked. So, thinking that there was something very much amiss here, she waited and waited, and of course, sure enough, there were men in these 3 chests waiting to come out and steal things from the house and get even. But Roseanne recognized what was going on, and so in the morning, just to check this out in the wee hours of the morning, she got up and she put some hot oil on the stove, and then she came to the chests and drilled a little hole in each and poured in hot oil, and there was great screams coming out from the chests, and all of a sudden 3 men burst out and went staggering down the stairs and out the door, very much the worse for wear. I mean, of course, there were 3 cohorts of the thief who, when they went back to tell the thief, he was absolutely furious that another plan of his had been foiled. So, still wanting and needing to have revenge on this little whippersnipper, he devised another plan. But by this time, there was a very sad happening, because Roseanne's husband had gone on another pilgrimage, and while they were away, their caravan was assailed by robbers and thieves and bandits, and all of the caravan was killed. So at a very, very young age, Roseanne, still in her teens, became a widow. And this being the case, she went back to her parents' house, and her mother-in-law decided to go and live with her sister in that far-off, distant place. So now Roseanne was a widow at her parents' home. But our thief had devised a plan, and in the process of his plan, he'd cut his beard and dressed himself up like an ordinary citizen of the place, instead of being a robber and a ne'er-do-well. And he went to find an old woman who was known for her witchery, and he paid her a lot of money to devise a plan. And so it happened that the old woman took up residence as a neighbor of Roseanne and her parents, and befriended her mother. Now the old witch, as she obviously was, an old crone, pretended that she was very pious. She prayed 5 times a day, and she became very, very friendly with Roseanne's mother, and Roseanne's mother came to trust her very well. Well, it came about that the mother and father of Roseanne were going off to visit some relatives, leaving Roseanne in the house. But during the time that they were away, this old woman, who Roseanne had always had doubts about because her piety was over the top, was a little bit suspicious of her. But the old woman came over and said, "Oh, your mother has given me a message that your cousin is getting married in the place that they are, and they want you to join them. And so I've arranged a horse and carriage for you to be taken to their place, and I will accompany you." So sure enough, the carriage was there, and Roseanne and the old woman set out. But after they'd gone for some very long distance, they came to what was a very palatial-looking house, but there was no festivity going on there at all. There were no people around, and nothing was going on. So Roseanne became somewhat suspect about this, but she followed on. But then the old woman took her into the house and said, "I just have to go out on an errand." But when the old woman left, she locked the door behind her, leaving Roseanne left in the house alone. Now, of course, this was the thief's house, and the plan had been set up that when the old woman had finished her work, that the robber would come along and he was going to dispose of Roseanne. He intended to kill her. But as it happened, Roseanne looked around the place and realized that she was trapped and there was no means of escape. The doors were locked and the windows were barred. But she did look up, and she found that there was a skylight there. So she was able to pull a table over and reach the skylight. But before doing so, she took a bag and took a number of what were very valuable treasures from around the place, realizing, of course, that this indeed was the thief himself. So she managed to climb through the skylight and made her escape. Well, you can imagine how furious this thief was to be foiled yet again by a teenage woman. So he was not to be beaten. He would find a way to kill her and make his revenge no matter what. So again, he created another persona. He not only kept his beard and moustache trimmed, but he bought a little shop. He was quite rich by now after all his lootings, and he set himself up as a jeweler, selling jewelry. And he became quite a respected being around town. People went to his shop, and he was very polite to them, and he did business with them. So it happened one day that Roseanne and her mother went into the shop, and Roseanne immediately recognized the robber. But she pretended not to do so, and they had a little haggle over a piece of jewelry, and Roseanne said, "Oh, we'll come back. I'll come back with my mother, and we'll purchase this piece of jewelry." So she went off, but Roseanne knew that there was something afoot. And as it happened, being a young widow, her parents, of course, wanted to get her married off again, and they'd bought several suitors, but none of them that she cared for, until it came to notice that a certain jeweler was looking for a wife, and it came to the ears of the parents that he would be a very suitable husband for their widowed daughter. So this time, of course, Roseanne was refusing, but her father got angry with her and said, "You have refused the suitors that we brought along, and now here comes a man who is well-to-do and well thought of in the town. We insist that you marry him." Well, Roseanne knew that she was trapped. She could not go against her parents' wishes, and so the wedding arrangements were made. Of course, our thief was gloating. At last he'd got her. He would have her where he wanted her. But it so happened that Roseanne, being bright as she was, in the preparations for her wedding, she had a duplicate wedding dress made, and she obtained for herself a goat's skin. And on her wedding day, when it was proposed that she would go to their chamber and prepare herself for the wedding ceremony and feast, that Roseanne dressed the goat skin in the duplicate wedding gown, and she had already prepared a very sweet nectar, which, with the berries that were made, was the color of blood. And she filled the goat skin and dressed it in the wedding gown, veiled beautifully, and laid it on the wedding bed. And then she hid herself. After the ceremony was over, of course, and she was sent to her chamber to await her husband. But she hid herself behind a curtain or in a cupboard of some sort, and finally the door opened, and in came the bridegroom, our thief, resplendent in his wedding gear, and said to the goat skin on the bed, dressed in the wedding gown and the beautiful veils, "Now I have you, you whippet. I'm going to do with you what it is that I have longed to do all of this time." And so he took out his dagger, and he went over to the bed, and he stabbed the bride, flowing out of, and of course to finish it off, he took some of the blood to drink it and complete his task, and found that it was a delicious nectar. And he began to weep. He fell on his knees. "What have I done? Oh, Roseanne, I love you. I've loved you all along. What have I done? I cannot live any longer without you." And he took his knife and was about to stab himself in the heart. And Roseanne came out from behind her curtain, and she said, "What, do you want to make me a widow for a second time?" She fell into his arms. They made beautiful love, and they had many children. So it said that in each of us there is a predominant archetype. What for you in this story? Who is the predominant archetype? Is it Roseanne? Is it the thief? What say you? The predominant archetype. And how does this story, this teaser, and how does it perhaps facilitate or enable us to answer the question, to grab a thread of what it is that's been permanent and unchanging in our life, admitting that every character in every story is a part of ourself. What do you recognize as the archetype in this story?